What started as a routine training exercise quickly became the stuff of legend in military aviation circles. Captain Miller and his squadron of 4 F-15E Strike Eagles were conducting night maneuvers off the coast, testing new formation protocols that would later be implemented in sensitive operations. The weather that evening was described as marginal at best, with low cloud cover and occasional thunderstorms moving through the area. Despite these conditions, command determined the exercise should proceed as planned, a decision that would later be scrutinized in multiple after-action reviews. Miller, known for his exceptional navigation skills and calm demeanor, had expressed minor concerns about atmospheric interference but trusted the sophisticated radar systems on board his aircraft. What made this mission particularly challenging was its classified nature. They weren't just flying in formation, but were tasked with intercepting a simulated hostile aircraft while maintaining complete radio silence. The squadron was equipped with the latest radar technology, supposedly capable of functioning even in the most severe weather conditions. Each pilot had undergone extensive training specifically for this scenario, logging over 200 hours in simulators before the actual mission. This level of preparation was standard protocol for what military strategists considered worst-case scenario training, preparing elite pilots to operate even when communication networks might be compromised during actual combat situations. As they reached the designated exercise area, the squadron spread into a wide search pattern, each aircraft maintaining specific positions relative to one another through their radar systems. Everything was proceeding according to plan when suddenly, at precisely 22:17 hours, Miller's radar screen flickered once before going completely dark. His first thought was a simple system reboot would solve the problem, a common enough occurrence in high-performance aircraft where sensitive electronics occasionally glitch. But when his backup systems also failed to respond, he knew something far more serious was happening. What he didn't know was that his wasn't the only aircraft experiencing this problem. Within 30 seconds, every radar system in all 4 aircraft had failed completely, leaving the pilots effectively blind in the darkness. The thunderstorms had intensified, creating a perfect storm of conditions. No visual references, no radar guidance, no radio communication by protocol, and 4 aircraft traveling at over 400 knots in close proximity. This was the scenario no one had prepared for, a total systems failure without warning. What happened in the next 8 minutes would become required study at every major flight school in the Western world and would challenge our understanding of what pilots are truly capable of when technology fails them completely. The moment all systems went dark, Captain Miller faced what pilots call the impossible scenario: complete technological isolation while commanding a $30 million aircraft traveling at nearly the speed of sound. Modern combat pilots are trained to rely heavily on sophisticated radar and navigation systems, making a total failure particularly disorienting. In those first critical moments, Miller later reported experiencing what psychologists call temporal distortion, where time seems to slow down during extreme stress. This phenomenon allowed his mind to process information faster than normal, giving him precious extra seconds to evaluate his options before disaster struck. What makes this situation particularly remarkable is how quickly Miller transitioned from technological dependence to raw instinct. During his debrief, he described how years of practice in smaller, less sophisticated aircraft suddenly became relevant again. Before flying F-15s, Miller had spent 3 years piloting vintage aircraft with minimal instruments, a hobby he maintained because he enjoyed the purity of flight. This experience, seemingly irrelevant to his military career, suddenly became his lifeline. He began to feel the aircraft through subtle vibrations in the control stick, detecting minute changes in air pressure that indicated proximity to other objects long before they would become visible. The most impressive aspect of Miller's response wasn't just his calm under pressure, but his immediate adaptation to using sensory information most pilots have been trained to ignore. Modern cockpits are designed to minimize distractions, including sensory feedback that might pull attention from instrument panels. However, Miller began using the sound of air moving across his aircraft surface to gauge speed and attitude, feeling minute temperature changes that indicated nearby aircraft, and even detecting subtle changes in the engine's pitch that suggested altitude variations. "It was like my aircraft became an extension of my body," he later explained. "I wasn't flying with my eyes anymore. I was flying with every cell in my body." What Miller couldn't know was that the other pilots in his squadron were experiencing the same crisis, each responding differently to the sudden blackout. Lieutenant Sarah Chun, flying the number 2 position, initially panicked and began a steep climb to avoid potential collision. A textbook response, but one that could have separated her from the formation permanently. Lieutenant Mark Rodriguez in position 3 began circling in place, believing it the safest option until systems returned online. And Lieutenant Dave Wilson in the 4th position had already begun emergency procedures to restart his systems, essentially removing himself from formation. Without intervention, these 4 aircraft would continue diverging paths until fuel exhaustion or, worse, mid-air collision. This was the moment when Miller made a decision that defied all standard operating procedures, yet saved everyone involved. As the squadron scattered in darkness, Captain Miller made the controversial decision to break radio silence, a direct violation of mission parameters that could result in disciplinary action. His first transmission was simple. "Formation, this is lead. Maintain current heading and speed. Follow my voice." The sound of his calm, measured tone had an immediate effect on the other pilots. Military psychologists would later study this moment as a prime example of leadership transference, where the confidence of one individual transfers to an entire group during crisis. But breaking radio silence was just the beginning of Miller's unconventional approach to their predicament. What happened next demonstrated Miller's deep understanding of both human psychology and aircraft physics. Rather than attempting to form a traditional formation, impossible without visual or radar reference, he instructed the squadron to form an audio-based positioning system. Every 3 seconds, each pilot would transmit a single click over the radio in sequence, creating a rhythm that allowed everyone to maintain awareness of each other's operational status. This improvised solution created what Miller called a sonic formation, using sound waves rather than radar waves to maintain group cohesion. Aviation experts have since noted the brilliant simplicity of this approach, which leveraged existing communication equipment in an entirely novel way. The most remarkable aspect of Miller's solution was his instruction to use the aircraft's landing lights in a precisely timed sequence. One quick flash every 20 seconds, staggered by 5 seconds between aircraft. This minimal visual reference, combined with the audio clicks, created just enough situational awareness to prevent collision while minimizing the risk of detection, had this been an actual combat scenario. What makes this approach so noteworthy is that it directly contradicted emergency procedures, which call for continuous illumination of all external lights during systems failure. Miller later explained his reasoning. Continuous lights would have created 4 fixed points moving through space without context, but timed, sequential flashing created a 3-dimensional reference system. As the squadron established this improvised communication system, Miller began the most difficult phase of his plan, guiding the formation back to base without navigation instruments. Drawing on his extensive knowledge of stellar navigation, a skill considered obsolete by most modern pilots, he used visible star positions to establish rough directional heading. By identifying the North Star through brief breaks in the cloud cover and correlating its position with his estimated location based on mission timing, Miller calculated an approximate heading toward their home base. What followed was 28 minutes of intensive concentration as he verbally guided his squadron through cloud cover, thunderstorms, and total darkness, relying on nothing but instinct, basic celestial navigation, and the impromptu communication system he had established. 17 minutes into their return journey, the squadron faced its most perilous moment when they encountered what meteorologists later identified as a level 5 thunderstorm cell directly in their path. Under normal circumstances, radar would have detected this dangerous weather system miles in advance, allowing for course correction. Without functioning equipment, the pilots had no warning until they began experiencing severe turbulence. This was the moment when conventional wisdom would suggest splitting up the formation to minimize collision risk. Yet Miller made the opposite call, instructing his squadron to tighten formation using their audiovisual reference system, with only 500 feet separating each aircraft. What aviation experts find most remarkable about this decision is how it contradicted decades of emergency procedure training, yet proved absolutely correct for their specific situation. By maintaining tight formation, the pilots were able to coordinate their movements through the turbulence, effectively functioning as a single unit rather than 4 individual aircraft fighting the storm independently. Lieutenant Chen later described this experience as flying blind in perfect synchronization, like a flock of birds navigating by instinct rather than sight. The formation moved as one entity through the storm front, each pilot responding to minute changes in air pressure and using the landing light flashes from the aircraft ahead as their only visual reference. The most dangerous moment came precisely 23 minutes after radar failure, when Miller's aircraft suddenly dropped 1,200 feet in less than 6 seconds due to a powerful downdraft. Without hesitation, he instructed the squadron to follow my descent rather than maintain altitude as procedures would dictate. This split-second decision prevented the formation from separating vertically in conditions where re-establishing position would have been impossible. Military aviation instructors now refer to this as the Miller maneuver, deliberately moving an entire formation through hazardous conditions rather than attempting to navigate around them, based on the principle that predictable movement, even through danger, is safer than unpredictable separation. As they emerged from the storm cell, the squadron faced another critical challenge. They were now significantly off course and had consumed more fuel than planned due to the inefficient flight path through turbulence. With fuel reserves dropping to critical levels and still no functioning navigation equipment, Miller made another counterintuitive decision that would later be studied in military academies worldwide. Rather than attempting to recalculate their position using stars, now obscured by cloud cover, he descended the entire formation to just 3,000 feet, dangerously low for night flying without instruments, but just high enough to potentially identify ground features. This calculated risk placed them below most of the cloud cover, where the lights of coastal communities might become visible. The question remained, would they recognize anything in time to redirect to an airfield before fuel exhaustion? Just as fuel warnings began to illuminate cockpits across the squadron, Captain Miller caught a glimpse of something familiar through his side window, a particular pattern of lights that triggered a memory from his training years. During his initial flight school exercises, Miller had developed a personal hobby of memorizing distinct light patterns of coastal towns near military bases, considering it a backup navigation method. What he recognized was the distinctive harbor illumination of a fishing village located approximately 30 miles south of their home base. This seemingly insignificant personal habit suddenly became the key to their survival, providing the crucial reference point needed to reorient the entire squadron. What aviation psychologists find most fascinating about this recognition moment is how it exemplifies the concept of prepared intuition, where years of accumulated experience create neural pathways that allow for instant pattern recognition without conscious processing. Miller didn't need to analyze the light pattern methodically. He simply knew what he was seeing through what some might call a gut feeling, but is actually the brain's remarkable ability to process complex visual information against stored memories. This capacity for intuitive recognition tends to develop only in experts with thousands of hours of experience, which explains why Miller could make this identification while the other pilots saw nothing significant in the same visual field. The most crucial aspect of this moment wasn't just the recognition itself, but Miller's absolute certainty in his identification, which allowed him to make an immediate course correction with complete confidence. Without hesitation, he instructed the squadron to adjust heading by 42 degrees, a precise correction that only makes sense if you're absolutely certain of your position relative to your destination. Military leadership experts point to this as a perfect example of decisive action under uncertainty, the ability to commit fully to a decision despite incomplete information. Miller later explained, In that moment, doubt wasn't an option. Either I was right, and we'd make it home, or I was wrong, and we'd all be ejecting over water within 15 minutes as our fuel ran out. As the squadron executed the course correction, something remarkable happened that confirmed Miller's intuition. Far on the horizon, they began to detect the faint glow of their airbase's approach lighting, barely visible through thin cloud cover. This visual confirmation came exactly 37 minutes after the initial radar failure, with each aircraft showing critical fuel reserves of less than 10 minutes remaining. What followed was perhaps the most challenging part of their journey: coordinating the approach and landing of 4 aircraft at night, with minimal instrumentation and dangerously low fuel. Miller now needed to transform his improvised formation into a landing sequence without the benefit of tower communication or runway lighting, a challenge that would require even more creativity and precision than what had come before. As the squadron approached their home base, they faced the most technically demanding challenge yet: landing 4 high-performance fighter aircraft with no functioning instruments, minimal communication with the tower, and critically low fuel. Standard procedure for instrument failure calls for diversion to the nearest available airfield with emergency lighting capabilities. However, Miller assessed that their fuel situation was too critical for any diversion. They would need to land at their home base immediately or face ejection, a risky proposition at night over the cold waters of the North Sea. Miller's solution demonstrated why true airmanship goes far beyond technical training or rulebooks. What happened next has been described as the most impressive display of formation landing ever documented outside of airshow performances. Miller instructed the squadron to form a tight linear formation with 1,000-foot spacing, close enough to maintain visual contact using their landing lights, but with sufficient distance to allow sequential landing on the same runway. Rather than having each aircraft circle and approach individually, the standard procedure, Miller would lead the formation directly on a final approach, with each subsequent aircraft following the same precise glide path with minimal time separation. Military aviation historians note that this approach has only been utilized in extreme emergency situations perhaps 3 times in modern aviation history, and never with complete radar and instrument failure. The most remarkable aspect of Miller's approach plan was his use of collective experience as a navigation tool. He asked each pilot to independently calculate their estimated position relative to the runway based on visual cues, then verbally compare these assessments in real time during approach. This consensus navigation technique effectively turned 4 struggling individuals into a single, more capable entity, leveraging their combined spatial awareness to create a more accurate picture than any one pilot could achieve alone. Aviation training experts now teach this technique, called Miller's Collective, as an emergency procedure for situations where standard navigation fails, but multiple aircraft remain in communication. As they began final approach, base personnel, now aware of their situation through emergency frequencies, illuminated the runway with every available light source, including vehicle headlights positioned along the runway edges. Captain Miller touched down first, providing verbal guidance to the following aircraft as he decelerated. 3-degree glide path. Aim for the second panel of lights. Expect downdraft at half-mile final. One by one, each aircraft landed safely with textbook precision despite the extraordinary circumstances. Lieutenant Wilson, the last to land, touched down with just 4 minutes of fuel remaining, a margin so narrow that subsequent fuel analysis showed his engines would have flamed out during a single go-around attempt. As the squadron taxied to a stop, the magnitude of what they had accomplished began to sink in. They had overcome a catastrophic systems failure through a combination of leadership, instinct, and unprecedented teamwork that would redefine emergency protocols for years to come. What Captain Miller and his squadron accomplished that night wasn't just a remarkable feat of flying. It was a powerful reminder of the human capability that exists beneath our technological dependence. When every system failed, when darkness surrounded them, and when conventional wisdom offered no solution, they found a path forward using the most sophisticated computers ever created, their own minds. This incident has now been incorporated into training programs worldwide, not just for military pilots, but for commercial aviation, spacecraft operators, and even crisis management teams in completely different fields. Ask yourself, what would you do if the technology you rely on daily suddenly disappeared? Have you developed the instincts and fundamental skills that would allow you to function when systems fail? The truth is, most of us have become so dependent on our devices and automated systems that we've allowed our natural capabilities to atrophy. Captain Miller's story stands as both inspiration and warning, a reminder that beneath every sophisticated system should be a human capable of taking control when necessary. This is why the military now incorporates technology blackout scenarios into all advanced flight training, forcing pilots to reconnect with fundamental skills that technology often renders unnecessary. But this lesson extends far beyond aviation. In your own life, how often do you practice navigating without GPS, communicating without your smartphone, or solving problems without internet search? The resilience demonstrated by Miller's squadron is available to all of us, if we're willing to develop and maintain those fundamental human capabilities. The next time you find yourself automatically reaching for technology to solve a problem, challenge yourself to try another approach first. Exercise those mental muscles that decades of technological convenience have allowed to weaken. Remember Captain Miller's words after the incident. Technology didn't save us that night. What saved us was everything we knew how to do when the technology wasn't there. What fundamental skills are you keeping sharp for when your own systems fail? If this story has inspired you to think differently about skill development and technological dependence, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We bring you these remarkable, true stories of human capability and resilience every week. Stories that entertain while providing valuable lessons for your own life. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of what humans are truly capable of when pushed to their limits. Until next time, keep your skills sharp and your mind sharper, because you never know when everything will depend on what you can do without technology.